So hi everyone, thank you for coming to the Swiss Japan Architecture Conference on in space of Shinohara, both in person at the Architekturforum Zu and online. As it's called the conference, you are part of Market. We would like to bring an opportunity to talk about the space where there is less space in architecture, however the issue of build environment is so much diverse and crucial. For this opportunity, we welcome to 6 panelists and please allow me to introduce them. Momoyo Kaijima is a co-founder of Atelier Basel, the architectural practice based in Tokyo, together with Yoshiharu Tsukamoto and professor and head of architectural behaviorology at ETH Zurich. She graduated at Nippon Women's University and the Tokyo Institute of Technology, where she studied Kazunari Sakamoto laboratory, who were in laboratory. And same as her work on architecture, her research works of architectural behaviorology is unique and influential. Known as Made in Tokyo and architecture and Christian Dehli and Andrea Grolimund, co-founder of Dehli Grolimund, are known as that they published the book Kazuo Shinohara 300. They studied both at ETH Zurich and graduated under Professor Christian Perez, architecture known as Shinohara influenced. They contributed to the construction of an umbrella house by Kazuo Shinohara to the Vitra Campus, which completed in this summer. Fuminori Nousaku is a founder of Fuminori Nousaku Architect and a professor at Tokyo Metropolitan University. He studied at Tokyo Institute of Technology, where he received a PhD at Yoshiharu Tsukamoto Laboratory, who are pupil of Kazunari Sakamoto. He works on the houses received international recognition, such as special mention of National Pavilion at the International Architectural Exhibition Venice Biennale. He published an essay called The Edifice of the Wild. Oliver Lutjens is the co-founder of Lutjens #1 Architecture and the visiting critic at Harvard Graduate School of Design. He studied at both ETH Zurich and ETH Lausanne and has taught at several schools in Europe over the decade after he founded the office. His recent works focuses on housing in Switzerland, including the award-winning housing. They are currently expanding their field, working on the new residence in Africa and the Swiss Consul building. Taku Sakaushi is the founder of OFGA and a professor at the Tokyo University of Science. He graduated at Tokyo Institute of Technology, where he studied in the David Stewart and the Kazuo Shinohara laboratory. He received his master at UCFL, LA, and Tokyo Tech. He worked for Nikken Sekkei Architecture over 30 years before he received his PhD in Shinshu University. Besides his architectural works, he is engaged in writing and the translation of architectural theory. Then we have a moderator for the discussion. Tibo Joanelli is an architect and an editor of work, Bowen and Bowman, known as the writer of Shinoharistics, and let's say about Tanikawa House. He studied architecture at ETH Zurich, where he met Tanikawa House in the studio of Fabio Reinhardt and Lucas Schick. He contributed about books and magazines, and he is one of the influential critics in current architectural scene today. The panelists have 20 minutes of presentation each. Tibo will summarize the presentations and start the discussion among the panelists. Afterwards, we will be happy to hear the feedback from the audience and welcome the questions. So thank you so much for Architekturforum for having us for the venue, Creation Bauern, Big Seal, and Mission Corporation for supporting us. So please welcome Momoyo.
So thank you very much for inviting me. Please. Thank you very much for inviting me to have a short speech or lecture. So I'm not specialist of the Shinohara, so I a bit hesitate to explain about Shinohara in front of the special researchers. But what I try to explain to as an architect to address what is Shinohara for me. And then I had a very, very, very important experience for me. Today I try to explain this kind of opportunity. And then GA Japan 04. Yes, this is a magazine started to the 1992 October, and it was published in the GA Japan Architects, and then also it was run by the Futagawa, Yukio Futagawa, photographer, very important in Japanese photographers. And then he invited to the Ishido, so the editor. So and then he was also before the Kenchiku editor. He established a very important Japanese magazine, so Japan Juka Tokushu, so in Japan Architect. And then so his major is of course very focusing on the Japanese housing, but at the same time. Sorry, I don't know. I skip one model. Yes. So this is the Ishido house, and also it was designed by Sakamoto. So, and then Sakamoto is my professor. Kazuo Shinohara is my professor in Tokyo Tech, and they have very strong collaboration in the client and also architects. And then Sakamoto had received a request from the Ishido, so to introduce some young students to do some make an article for him. So, and then I was selected because I was first year master student with two other my colleague, and then so we were started to make a 5 article on this 5 issue. And then it was 1992, so it's almost, wow, so 30 years ago. I was a bit hesitant whether it was a really great opportunity. So first one is Hara, so Hiroshi Hara. So that period just he designed on the Kyoto Station building. So it was a very big competition in Japan, and he was really, really concentrated to this exercise. And then also it's interesting. So we in this article, the focusing on the office of the architects, and then the title is finding home tour. So that means the students try to visit their places, and they try to understand what the homes comes in the context. So that's why so office space and study method is also very one topics of the discussion, but also like idea where come from and how they create the process and the discussion among the staff. So all the things is coming into the article. And also second one, the Fumihiko Maki, all big names. So I'm surprised now, but just he finished this Tokyo gymnasium, so for the in front of now also they were used in Olympic Games, the last Olympic Games, and then he also has run a very big office in Takayama. We visited his office and talk about his notebook a lot. And also, Tadao Ando as the third one, so he was also very important architect at the moment. And then also that he made at the time so the third version of the Rocco apartment in the sloping site. And we visited the place, and also we visited his office space. And then I was also very happy to meet him, and he make a signed signature on his book and give us to. It's a big treasure. And also the fifth one is Kazuo Shinohara. So she was very just young architect starting her office, and at the moment she made she's making the forest house. And the photograph is very beautiful, so circular as a plan. And then she's also young, and she has a very small office, and we talk a lot. It's very, very fun. So my memories are for me. And then fourth one, so we visited the Shinohara's office. So he was already retired from the Tokyo Tech, and then this photograph is very beautiful photograph. The back is a house in Yokohama, so his own house. It was built after his retirement of Tokyo Tech, and then also it's also interesting. So we could not visit inside, so because the Stephen Hall cannot visit, even if he just entered the entrance only. So that's why we as children, of course, we could not visit, but we can see from outside. And then the question is, he covered also some paper on the windows, and he tried to hide his privacy. And I asked him why you want to hide and you want to keep, and then he said, so he make always jokes. So tracing papers or covering in the window is very beautiful light. He needs this kind of beautiful light, so that's why he mentioned about the reason. And also, this house is a house in Yokohama. The many photographs are shot by only house, but next to each other, so there is his original house he owned. So he lived, and then so now when he make a new house, switched his house and the office, and then this black one is becomes his office. And then it was built originally in, he said, the Roppongi, and then so the building were removed to this place in Okayama, in Yokohama. And then so the building is very silent, and it seems to be very black and so very traditional looking. Oh, sorry, so very bad photo, but inside, also the space is very interesting. Also the wood table by Kurumata Shiro. And also the poster on the wall is a NASA poster. So that's why many elements of the ground floor has a lot of influential elements in his maybe imagination. And then we also started to the discussion. So I think it's crazy, a long interview. We spent almost 10 hours at his office, and also the day, so we take a taxi with the editor. But it was he talked and talked so long time for younger stupid students to have a question, and it was very, very so beautiful memory for me. And we had a recorder, tape recorder, but he asked me, please erase everything after the text. I don't have now. And then, but I put all memos into this article. For example, the first part is about, so how do you make a study? So the first one is he said, we don't see not all together. It's for one plan, one elevation for each. They study each. So that is also very interesting because, for example, first White House is the square plan and very sharp elevation. And in this case, here try to separate it to be studies and then to take care of each element. And also, I saw that his model is a clay model, and then he said also that the clay model is very small, that we integrated with the sloping sides. And then he said, yeah, so model is very small, so but small model it looks like very cute. So and he did not express too much roughness, so the roughness becomes a cuteness. So that's why yeah, he likes this kind of small. So that means I think each model has a more very like a hand model also like a ball. And also because I was supporting to the teaching Kazunari Sakamoto so in geometry in the Tokyo Tech, and then in that place also the before Sakamoto so the Shinohara teach also geometry in the Tokyo Tech. And we had a lot of interesting model of the geometry at the studio. And then I also always thought that this geometry models must be, looks like a very house in Yokohama, a lot of juxtaposition idea. And then also we are discussing about the juxtaposition and this relationship between the mathematics and architecture. He said the space is the kind of in between words. So the architecture and mathematics, and also the house in Yokohama use the terminology the juxtaposition. So in the to try to make a sharp relationship between the essential element between two things. And also that we discussed after, yeah, even if he made a very beautiful form, so how realized in the reality. So this also he explained to the construction and also statics is very, very important part. And he had a very, very important collaborator, so Toshihiko Kimura. And he explained also that Kimura-san is one of the best special mathematicians to realize the beautiful structure. So that's why he can do such a building. And also I asked him, so how you choose one very selected forms in the studies? Because like he said, he has several contexts and several contexts brings tons of the variation. But the architects needs to select only one. But also this decision of the selection is also makes him very fear to forget the other opportunity. So that's why he said always he feel fear about the decision. And also he mentioned about how the design, how comes with some idea. It's sometimes it's coming the or I don't know what. Well, in Japanese, so and then suddenly the idea is comes from. So and then yeah. He doesn't know why it comes, but that many people said that this form looks like a goldfish or sometimes ammonite in this case. But this forms not coming from the goldfish and ammonite. So, for example, like he explained also the Franco Gehry. So as a reference, Franco Gehry said the fish tank, and he had a lot of interest in the fish schemes, but the Shinohara case, he doesn't have any interest in about the fish forms. So that's why, yeah, idea comes more individually and autonomous. And also about the 100年記念館 Centennial Hall is also the first idea is something floating above the cube. That is the first idea, that's all. But the other things is not clearly to imagine. And then also we discussed because of the why recently he was floating idea a lot. So and he also tried to mention that the past style of him had more contact on the ground. And during the 1960s, so he had a lot of kind of conflict in the tendency of the modern architects in Japan. So to try to address more the modernism style architecture. But in that sense, he wants to be more part of the different positionings into the earth and to understand the earth floor and also the digging the deep in the earthen housing. And then that case, of course, especially he mentioned about the materiality of the soil. So if he is, like he's mentioned, it's a concept of the living, in essence of sense of the living, when people have to think and stop and digging deeper and deeper. So everything is going to a very kind of deep, essential way, so to into the no limit. And then also we discussed about some form of the edge, and then also some why he tried to explain to the different method, but he still keeping the Japanese stance. And also like a different language, even if inorganic, the terminology, but same times the Japanese mention inorganic and the European mention inorganic might be different contexts. That's why he tried to be sharp as a form and language. And also the house in Yokohama, the juxtaposition I mentioned, there's just two boxes coming together. So he designed house, but he designed the box. So that's why, so like if everything clean up in the house, so nothing, just the box, and he doesn't matter about how the people use inside the house. And also for the last part is the city, about the city, because I'm very interested about the city context. And then he said mathematics city is kind of the counter argument to get the Japanese metabolist. And then he wants to propose more chaos is a very important concept. Because Tokyo chaos is, he mentioned, is not just random, more than like giving some rule behind. Because Tokyo, everybody is feeling the very good, some comfort as a Japanese. So that's why he wants to need some ideas why this kind of complicated system exists. And also, he extends to this idea the chaos becomes also the birth of the new phases and new order to create some form of the architecture. So that's why this kind of energy he needs. And also he really happy to establish some form from the energy of the city in Tokyo. And then the book, I brought one book, it's a Juntakuron, so house, and this is his design, and this still keep in. So, but already this book is belongs to Yoshihara, so it's mine, but the book is Yoshihara's. And then after these books, so this book included in the one very beautiful article. So I don't know exactly how to translate in English correctly. So, but what is the loss in the echo of the space? So the title is kind of conflict between the space, which had in historically or traditionally in Japanese life in South. And then, but this time, so there are a lot of new building comes and the new building system and modern building systems. So all city and the environment of the building are changed. So that's why he wants to try to keep the end. So we need to have a beautiful house, and we need to have a space, echo of the space, and how we can create. And then answer, so we try to understand at Ribawa point of view. So the title is Echo of the Space and Space of the Echo. So it was published, I forgot, 2010, something like. We try to collect a small daily essence and daily elements to how to bring the echo in our life. So that's it, our answer to his question. So that means also this is the last slide, but how influenced his works and his thinking to us. So, and then I very appreciate his all effort and great work. Thank you very much.
In this book. Yeah, unfortunately, Momoyo has to leave for next panel.
Bye-bye. Morning, Switzerland, evening, Japan. Thank you very much, Taku and Mio, for inviting us to Shinohara Symposium. The title of the symposium is Learning Spaces from Shinohara. We would like to show you 4 visits which we have done over the last 17 years in Japan. I'd like to start with Tokyo Tech Centennial Hall in 1987. Here we see the building from the outside. It's a geometric volume dissected by a half cylindrical body, cantilevering, floating. Here we can clearly see the volume protruding in the building, peeking out. The building was built for the 100th anniversary of Tokyo Institute of Technology. In the ground floor here, first floor, basement, we have museum. Second floor was conference spaces, also in the third floor, auditorium lobby. In the fourth space, we had the members club, restaurant, and a bar. In the section, you can clearly see this half cylindrical volume protruding this geometrical space, and we have different spaces that are being generated by this intersection of 2 geometrical bodies. In 2005, I did the internship at Edinburgh. The interns were sent to a conference at Centennial Hall. At that time, I didn't know anything about Shinohara, and this was the very first building I visited. I was a bit distracted because the whole lecture was in Japanese. I didn't understand a single word, and I was confronted with this curtain and this air condition which was peeking out of the curtain. As I didn't understand a single word, I was pretty much amazed by the space inside, which was very unusual for me. If you open up the window, you can see the half cylindrical body continues the outside, and it's even highlighted by the same finish inside as outside. This volume continues all the way through. It is kinked or bent its position, and as the half cylindrical volume is not parallel to the facade, it goes diagonally through the building. We have many different shapes or geometries that are generated. We have very low spaces, low ceiling heights, and very high ceiling heights. We have opaque surfaces and transparent surfaces. And the visitor is being navigated by the structure to different perspectives of the full plan. This bridge-like construction has technical functions like lighting, air ventilation. The bow of this half cylinder, and it feels like being underneath a whale or an aircraft. Here we see a conference room. It also collides with the staircase. And going up, we see the half cylinder, the inside, the restaurant bar, with the curved walls. The length of this cylinder is broken by this kink, which makes it like two parts, two kind of division. One side is facing Fuji, the other side is facing an Okayama station. Even the furniture designed by Shinohara matches the curved walls and makes that the people who are using the space get the impression of this world.
The next house we want to talk about is Prism House. We visited in 2014. It's a weekend house in the Fuji 5 lake area, situated at the foot of Mount Fuji. And it has a really steep roof. It was built for a set designer, Setsuo Sakura, and her husband, famous film director. Prism House, as its name says, has a very iconographic section. So it's an isoscale right triangle with a base of 7.6 meters and a hypotenuse of 10.8 meters. And we have a rectangular floor plan, which is divided in two parts: the main space and the functional second area with the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. The main space is a half cube, a really nice mathematical form. And that's also, Momoyo already talked about it. Kazuo Shinohara was, before he studied architecture, he was a trained mathematician, so he really liked this mathematical form. On the second floor, you can find the second bedroom. The house is entered from the woods directly into the kitchen. It's a low ceiling, really narrow space where you enter. And then you turn and find yourself colliding with a steep stair. And in the back, you can already see a horizontal beam and a vertical strut, diagonal strut. Then you walk around this stair and find yourself in a very high ceiling triangle room. And it was a bit, unfortunately, Prism House has been heavily modified, so the upper windows, these here and the ones on the roof, they were, are not part of the original design by Kazuo Shinohara. So we have a little bit of wrong perception of the room. It was much darker inside, especially in wintertime. So in this region, there's a lot of snow. But the spatial quality is still visible, and there's still this feeling that the structure determines the space itself. It's also, if you go around, you can see the second bedroom above. And this huge space is also, you can say it's almost a bit wasted space, but also really good space. It's a room with a high quality, and it's the core of the house. And that's also where the architecture itself happens, with this structure, the high room. And when you go up, you can see down to the core room of the house. The door is also. And then you have to look back from the second bedroom, like from a bird's nest, floating over the high main room. The first house I actually visited was house in Uehara. It's in Tokyo. It's also a really famous house. It's a masterpiece within Kazuo Shinohara's oeuvre. It's a two-story concrete building with a steel structure on top. It was built for the Otsuchi family. Yoshitsuki Otsuchi was a photographer, and he had his studio on the first floor in the basement, and the second floor, the living area, is cantilevering above a carport on this side here. What's also what you can see here clearly are these big, heavy columns with the struts, the horizontal, vertical, diagonal struts. And there, and the structure, it goes from the second floor, from the roof, the structure holds the roof actually, down to the basement. For all of you, that's the studio with the tea room, a dark room, and the toilet facilities. And then you enter, that's the carport, you take this thing, go up this stair and enter the living space. With the kitchen, the dining area, a bedroom, a tatami room, the bathrooms, and the second bedroom on the top. The second bedroom on the top was an addition that came really late in the design process, so the house was already designed when the client wanted to have an additional bedroom. You enter a house with a stair. You go up. You can still see the street. You can see through the window into the living area with this huge column with struts, and there is also a top light, so you can also see the sky. The concrete structure is visible in the whole house, so you don't have any large space in this house. Something that Shinohara always or a long time tried to make or to design. But here you have this fragmented space. So in every single room, you find the columns. They are visible. They are also, you can feel them. You have to go around them. That's the bedroom. They are even also defining in the facade where the windows are. They're also partitioning the spaces from each other. There is a steep stair where you can go upstairs to the steel frame cylindrical vault with the two iconographic eyes. And that's also the first time Shinohara used this collision where two different forms were abruptly joined together, like this box with this vault on top of it. It was the starting point for a new design style for him.
The last building we will present is Umbrella House, originally built in 1961 in Tokyo, which was relocated this year to Weilenrhein. In 2019, Umbrella House was in danger of being demolished, and Vitra saved the house. The house itself was modified, but the visual or spatial qualities were still existing. They took it apart and shipped it to Germany, where it was reassembled again. We did this in collaboration with Tokyo Tech, namely Professor Okuyama's laboratory and Yamazaki laboratory, and Masa Otsuka, who was in charge of this project, in Japan. Last 1.5 years, we have been working on this project. Here we see the section of umbrella house. It has a pyramidal shaped roof, which was highly exceptional for the time for a domestic house. Usually you saw this type of roof in temples. And you can also see clearly the roof structure, the umbrella, which was a reference. The reference was this Japanese paper umbrella, which was square plan, 7.5 by 7.5 meters. The entrance is here at the west side. You enter the kitchen dining room, which is separated by a bamboo screen. Here we have the living room, the tummy room, which can be separated by kusuma and sliding walls. And here we have the toilet and the bathroom. It's a tiny house, just 55 square meters big. And the whole idea of the house, the spatial qualities can already be seen in this early stage. So we have the concrete foundation, and then we have the timber structure on top. If we fill the spaces between the rafters, the roof is covered, and we have a large roof, which is sitting on the four walls. The ceiling height is about 4 meters high, which is exceptionally high, and the roof continues from inside to the outside. This photo shows the different scales. So here we have a person, ceiling, which is 4 meters high. We have a ladder that connects the living room with the storage space in the second level. We have divisions, the kusuma, with bamboo screen, and we have custom-made furniture. And everything is pretty much flexible. And because of the defined size of the furniture and the flexibility of the sliding elements, this house becomes suddenly very large. It's basically one open space that you can divide into different parts, and every room has different qualities. Also the tatami room, which is one step higher than the living room, has a low ceiling and a totally different geometrical shape. And what can be said about this space? What is a good space, a bad space? If it would have been a bad space, nobody would have done the effort to preserve this space. So what we did, we went back to the original scheme which Shinohara had planned to be able to show the spatial qualities, and they're still timeless.
With this, we thank you very much for coming and our presentation.
Yes, you're great.
I wonder how many people are listening in Japan.
200.
Oh, 200. Wow.
Hello, I'm Fuminori Nousaku. Thank you for inviting me to this symposium. Today I will talk about the genealogy of Minka and approaching Minka. A Minka is an indigenous Japanese house. Kazuo Shinohara focused on the Minka, especially when creating his early works in the Basel style. In his residential theory, Shinohara stated that Minka is mature, and Minka is a natural phenomenon for its architecture. Shinohara also viewed Minka as having contemporary meaning only when considered in connection with daily life. He also said Minka can relate to the creation of the contemporary house in very different social conditions. It is the reason of the skillful breathing between human and space, not the exposure of black pillars and beams. The evaluation of Japanese architecture concentrated mainly on buildings for the aristocracy. For example, Grolimund House and Kenzo Tange highly evaluated Katsura Imperial Villa. But Shinohara, however, appreciated the Minka, a house for the daily ordinary people, and created works such as Umbrella House and House with Earthen Floor. In the pre-war period, interest in Minka included, for example, the ethnological studies of Wajiro Kon and the folk art movement by Momoyo Kaijima and others. And Shinohara looks back on post-war Japanese traditional theory and classifies them into three categories. The first is the aristocratic culture creation center in Katsura Imperial Villa. The second evaluates Minka as a reaction to this. And the third is a survey on villages, which began around the 1970s. This stems from an interest in architecture without architecture, or vernacular architecture rather than Japanese tradition. Shinohara states in his later residential theory that he is interested in speciality of Minka. He said, I have never wanted to create something anonymous that is not vernacular expression. And he stated that Minka was just selected as an expression of freedom against narrow-minded functionalism and rationalism. And he said, even when I was looking for Japanese space, my interest was in abstract. Architects such as Kenzo Tange tried to integrate Japanese tradition and modernism. Their model was a dialectical way of thinking. Shinohara will consider Minka in a structured way. It was a revolutionary method. For example, it is similar to the structuralist idea of contrast and constant and transformation. Shinohara transformed Minka geometrically using squares, proportional division, and special roof slopes. At the same time, he used abstraction. The emphasis on contrast and opposition is another characteristic of Shinohara's architecture. The contrast between the roof and the earthen floor leads to the contrast between the sky and the ground. As seen in the White House, there is conflict between the abstract and the concrete, with white cubes and cedar pillars. There is also contrast between the whole and fragmentation. The third and uncertain, especially in the third and fourth sky. There was also awareness of the contrast between the authorship and anonymity of Minka architect's work. When faced with Japanese tradition, Shinohara confronted it with a new method. So today we need to reinterpret Minka in a different way from Shinohara. I would like to reinterpret Minka as a network of things under the traditional ecological knowledge. In the past, Minka were built by local carpenters and the people. But since the introduction of Western wooden construction method, Minka has been transformed by regulation and industrialization throughout the 20th century. After the Great Earthquake, the building standard law was revised and housing structure were reinforced. Houses could be mass-produced to accommodate the post-war population growth. During the period of high economic growth, home builder emerged. The high urban densification led to strict the fire protection regulation for housing. Energy conservation standards were established, which improved the insulation and airtightness of houses. As airtightness increased, sick building syndrome increased, and 24-hour ventilation devices became mandatory. Solar panels were partially mandated to decarbonize and solve energy shortage, and the use of wood was promoted. The interaction between people's lives and their dwellings was lost. Minka became surrounded by the industrial system. Thus, the landscape in Minka has been lost. However, even in the broken landscape, a few traces of Minka remain. So I will show my project, Takao Guest House, which is my grandmother's residence and guest room. So there are many houses in the Japanese countryside with Kawara roof tile. The 3 generations of our family is there. But now my grandmother lives alone. So we will try to make this house and inviting friends and family to visit my grandmother. And we wanted to remain with my family's memories. We used existing materials, for example, shoji and carving bansan. In the second phase, we remove the roof tile from the roof. We store the old tiles in the garden. Cutting the roof column and studs to remove the roof. So we use a frame to remove the structure. So it takes 15 minutes to move the roof structure. So we measure the size of the roof, and then we measure the concrete slab, and then we transfer the heat roof on the new structure. Also is Japanese seaside, so it's very snowy area. So covering the roof is all the time. Trusting the wall. The guest room will not. Finishing the kitchen comes down with the laptop. So we were able to maintain a continuous landscape with high roofs, like characteristic of Minka. So a Western technology was introduced during the Meiji period. Structural features such as concrete foundations and bricks were introduced into wooden houses. So Dento Hoho, traditional construction method used stone foundation and nuki joint structure. On the other hand, Zairai Hoho, conventional construction method used concrete foundation and bricks. When looking at the foundation of wooden houses, the stone foundation was replaced by a concrete continuous footing, and then by a solid slab foundation with improved moisture proofing and earthquake resistance. Minka with stone foundation allowed fresh air and water to permeate the soil. On the other hand, concrete slab and asphalt pavement broke the soil. Carbonized pine piles are placed under the stone foundation to prevent subsidence. In healthy soil that is permeable with fresh air and water, mycelia entangle the porous surface of the pile, and the mycelia bind the soil to the pile. I will introduce a canopy floor house. This house is in Yamanashi. Mount Fuji to the south, Southern Alps to the west of the south. An independent foundation is used to allow water and air to circulate through the soil. Instead of concrete, we propose a foundation made of recycled steel frame. A high floor will keep the foundation dry. Even if there is damage, it can be inspected in the roof. In the past, Minka were constructed with natural materials that return to the soil, such as wood, bamboo, straw, and soil. We decided to build the house with materials that can be returned to the soil. In this project, we applied the straw bale house construction method. So typically, petroleum products are used for insulation, but this project used straw for insulation. About 20 people with the instructor did straw piling and mud wall painting. So we use wheat straw for the wall material, the carry the straw blocks, the tie the rope, the pile of the straw blocks, the mix clay and sand applied soil by hand. The wooden structure is placed on an independent foundation. The roof slopes down to the south to maximize the sun energy. The wooden structure, the exterior view from the south, the living room is the center, and the bedrooms are at the both ends. The 2-meter deep veranda before Engawa overhang the house. The steel flat foundation opens up the ground surface, allowing air and water to penetrate into the soil. This is the living and dining room. On the left is a wall of straw and house. Shoji screens and traditional Japanese elements are biodegradable materials made of wood and paper. We use shoji often as screen instead of chemical fabric curtain. This is the bedroom surrounded by straw and earthen walls. The earthen walls store heat. The windows are very thick with straw bare walls. Exterior view on the south side, a series of wooden sash connects the veranda to the interior. The light from the shoji screens illuminates the garden. So next, I would like to introduce more project in Tokyo. Most of the ground surface and waterways are covered with concrete and asphalt. The soil underneath is dry and habitable. Concrete covered rivers do not purify the water, which is cloudy with sludge and developed smell. The project used to steel piles instead of concrete foundation. 8 steel piles were driven into the ground. Rainwater falling from roofs is allowed to soak into the soil on the site. Usually in urban buildings, rainwater flows through drains and into sewage pipes. Once we return all ground on the site to soil, a trench is dug where rain falls from the roof and bamboo is then placed in the ground. But by placing dried leaves and branches, bamboo, charcoal, and stones in the trenches, rainwater can easily permeate into the ground. The triangular roof is placed on top of a small volume. It's about 2.7 meter wide. The skylight is installed on the 60-degree slope roof. The wooden structure is raised about 400 millimeters of ground by steel pipe foundation. So this is the summary. The current way of building depends on the industrial system. Therefore, architecture works are also created within the industrial system. By looking at the genealogy of Minka, we can see parts of Japan's modernization. By reinterpreting Minka as traditional ecological knowledge, the echo of the state of Minka can emerge in the contemporary age. Since the method of building a traditional Minka is not common with modern construction methods, so we take a DIY participatory approach. It is not the social and ecological irrelevant to architecture. Rather, we can link them to the intrinsic values of architecture. Thank you.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me at this symposium. It's a great pleasure, honor, to speak about the influence of
Shinohara to our work, to the Swiss context. I met Shinohara, the architecture, not the person, when I was a student at ETH Zurich, the 5th semester. And there were two things happening at the time. First was that Valerio Olgiati became guest professor. And even though I couldn't manage to get into his studio, I would follow a lot of the conversations. The name Shinohara came up all the time. And the other thing what happened is that one of my best friends did an internship at Christian Keritz's office. In fact, I think he was the first intern at Christian's office. And he also came back with this excitement about Kazuo Shinohara. And so we went to the library. That's a time in the mid-90s where there was internet, but you could not like scan things or download things or store them on Dropbox. So we went to the library, and you could also not buy books online, right? Used books, which nowadays is such a pleasure to find treasures for almost no money. So we went to the library and we came across this French publication, and we made a Xerox copy of it. In fact, we made 2 Xerox copies. It's a square book, but we kind of made it in the 1:2 proportion, so in order to have the double spreads. And I still own this book. It's a funny object because you can't put it in a normal shelf, right? It's too long and it's too floppy. It's just a 3 Xerox copies. So it's always on a special place in the shelf. And what I love, I mean, the beauty is also of the Xerox machine, and especially with Taku Sakaushi photography, is that it's even more black and white and more energetic. So I mean, I really love this book, and I'm glad I still have it. So what surprised me about Shinohara's work is that I had the feeling his idea of space is never absolute. It's never one thing. It's rather a negotiation of different things. And I loved the fact that he would use figure in his work. Like structure is such an evident theme in Shinohara's work, but he always seems to use it as a figure to measure, a figure to introduce scale, to give order. And as we've also seen in Christian's Andrea's images, it's a coexistence between function and inhabitants and the architecture. In Shinohara's work, structure is 100% architecture. The other thing I was fascinated with is the way he uses geometry as a means to create order, not as a kind of tie on which a building has to happen, but rather as geometric figures that are within an open order. In my view, he used functional elements as a part of a language that can react and accommodate. It's not narrowing in, but rather opening up. For me, this was a promise of freedom. Coexistence, I thought, was really amazing in Shinohara's work. Like in the Tanikawa house, the coexistence of a static space provided by the roof and a completely dynamic space by this floor that is sloping. They both exist at the same time. And then there's another moment of coexistence in the, it's called C Stairway House, right? Where you have two functions, the working studio of an artist and his living quarters in the same kind of shoebox space, only divided by a shift in the floor. So this juxtaposition is really immediate and close, and at the same time distant, like 2 stage sets. What I found in Shinohara was a very mysterious very poetic, deep, dark, and light at the same time. An architecture was deep, dark, and light at the same time. And as a fifth semester student, this gave me an incredible amount of hope. And it has not vanished, this hope, like that contemporary architecture can really be as great as all the architecture of the past. I think what I also learned from Shinohara is that architectural ideas can transform. They're not bound to scale. They're not bound to function. They are independent, yet they provide so much for a building. And so in our work that deals mostly with housing, we have this discussion in the pre-talk that in Switzerland there's an incredible pressure on mobility, a lot of migration, lots of redensification. So young practices, they immediately start to engage in the housing market. The good thing is that there is space for architecture in the housing market due to an amazing competition system in Switzerland. This is the building here in Zurich on Hellenstrasse that we built about 5 or 6 years ago. It's a 10 apartment building, and it's literally the last urban building in Zurich. It's the last building in the block structure of the old city. It faces the slaughterhouse and the football stadium. And after that, there's an open sprawl of the Limit Valley. So in this building, we wanted to make a really, really contextual building, but we also realized we could not copy the context because the context did not provide any tradition or any kind of strong architectural ideas that we could lay on. And so we made this urban condition, two different cultural ideas, the block structure that deals about the street space and the sprawl structure that is the isolated building in the green. We wanted to make that as the spatial experience of this building. In its section, you can see that the upper floors, they kind of project outwards to the open field, whereas the lower pushes back into the courtyard of the block structure. And the plan also reflects that urban situation. It's a plan libre, you could say, a pilotis structures where columns are carrying the building. But at the same time, since these are, apartments that are on the conventional rental market, it's a quite conventional road-to-road structure. And unlike the plan libre of, say, Mies van der Rohe or Le Corbusier, here the columns were, in Mies and Corbusier's case, the columns have a very neutral position. They're part of the grid, right? Corbusier was only interested in what the walls could do within the plan libre. Here, the columns have an active role. They're parallel to the facade, holding back the interior space and creating a layer of space parallel to the facade. But then in the depth of the building, they're rotated by 90 degrees. And they have different thicknesses, not for structural reasons, but for architectural reasons. It's about rhythm and centrality. So see a few slides. It's a very fluent plan, and the way when you're inside, the way the exterior spaces come inside and they almost get reflected like, say, a pinball pin. In a pinball, within the structural columns, walls, of autonomous doors, there's very long views in the building, but always also to the outside that give you an incredible feeling, generosity. It's also a very deep building. The facade is made out of thin concrete panels. They're reinforced with glass fibers, so they're only 16 millimeters thin. It's a ventilated construction, which you can clearly see in the joints. And for us, this idea of thinness was incredibly important. Swiss architecture was based, like contemporary Swiss architecture was based on the idea that the construction of the building, what you see, is actually what you see. Like Valerio Giotti's work, where everything is concrete inside and outside. It's all about mass. This building is all assembled. It's all about layers of material that come together. It's very monumental in expression due to the fact that it's an isolated building. But with this thinness, kind of counteract that monumentality and give it an almost fragile presence. I guess for a Japanese audience, that's quite common. The facade it's a bit like an armor. We see it as a rustication, yet it's geometric and abstract. It's based on a grid, a kind of nihilist idea that eliminates all the figure, and that's why, because it's facing this suburban sprawl, say. And while the facade expression addresses the urban spaces very directly, the spatial experience of this urban situation is reflected within the private spaces. This building is on site now. It's in Algeria in Africa. It's the Swiss ambassador's residence. It's a very interesting building because it's a private residence, a single family house, but at the same time it represents Switzerland, the whole country, with its political values, with the cultural value, with the way we live together. It has highly representative functions. It contains the spaces where there's reception, discussion, conflicts, agreements, pleasure, and entertainment. And even though it's a single family house, it's a communal building. It's beautifully sited in a palm tree garden, which is walled in, so there's no security problem, which is always an issue with embassy. And the good thing is also that the building you see in the top right is the Chancellery building, which makes the monumental entrance and the security control to the site. And we realized that when we did the competition, the program would just provide for one floor of the building. Because imagine being an ambassador with your family, you're living there, and you're on the second floor. First floor representative space, second floor your private spaces. You're in a foreign country, in a walled-in garden. We thought that's the most impressive idea of living. So we wanted to be that everything on one level without hierarchy, and that the kids of the family can enjoy the garden as well as the important guests. The plan of the building is essentially rectilinear, yet some walls are at angle to provide spatial openings and, in general, a kind of kaleidoscopic space. This plan works a bit like a cubist painting. It has independent figures, yet, like in a cubist painting, it's a fluent spatial plan. See the triangular courtyard, which gives kind of a center, and this part introduces the language of rectilinear and angled walls. It works quite simply. There's a representational area where the full guest entrance is, and then there's two spaces for reception and dining, and both open up to the right on this big loggia overlooking the palm tree garden. On the top left, there's the back of the house, the kitchen, and there's the entrance for private part of the residence, and in the lower part you see the private quarters of the ambassador and the family. And there's no reception, the doors can be open and everything is kind of one house. Its expression is very diverse. It's a single-story building with quite a big floor plan, as you can see. So the question is always like, what is the role of the roof, right? It's if you think of the Barcelona Pavilion, that wide abstract plate is the roof. And we were like very worried, like, what are we going to do? Just this roof. So we started to add pieces. So sometimes they build a frieze, sometimes they open up almost like a garage door to give a cover, or to just cover the big loggia space. It's a concrete structure because that's how they can build in Algiers. But it's clad with thin, the same kind of material that we saw in the previous building to give it an expression of lightness and delicacy. Didn't want to make a heroic concrete structure like Oscar Niemeyer would have done, but rather something that feels assembled and light, and maybe also a tiny bit fragile. You see the windows play an important part. They're independent figures. There's screens on the walls inside the building to accentuate the depth of space. It's currently on site. They're just pouring now those slanted roofs. It's quite a challenge because Algeria, they don't really have local construction anymore. It's been imported for a long time, since the 1970s. They sell gasoline and they get imported. So we're dealing now, the windows have been measured and we're dealing now with tolerances up to 7 centimeters. So I'm quite glad that we didn't tie to precise geometry, but actually this kind of loose order can accommodate that. On top there's a roof terrace for receptions as well, where you can look over the ocean and the harbor of Algiers. So this building is a longhouse. It's called a sufficiency building. It's supposed to be the cheapest apartment building in Zurich or in Switzerland. That was the setup of the competition. And I'm very happy to show this model image because, when Shinohara's work grew in scale, the way he used figures as a kind of monumental expression, for instance, in this police station, that is like an upside down cigarette. I always admired it so much. And I'm very happy to be able to present this here. This shape comes just from the building laws, and I'm not going to detail it to that. This is in Regensdorf here in Zurich. It's a suburb that gets heavily urbanized now, and it's in a master plan of Peter Merkley. And the idea of sufficiency, it's an economical idea, but at the same time, it's an ecological idea. What can you leave away? We were quite worried that it's going to be just really depressing because if you leave all away, what gives the people space to live in, to dwell in, and is there a possibility to find kind of communal idea of this? It's straightforward. One staircase is the cheapest way to access 33 apartments. Open balconies is the other way to do that. To do it, every second floor had to do with building regulations so that you would not lose rentable surface. And the stepping came from the fact that on the left there is a high-rise building by Roger Holzhausen, which is really close by. So we were worried about light, and we were worried about just looking at the wall of this tower, like that, opening up the building. And since it's a very serial building, all the apartments are the same. But through the stepping, you can get them in 4 different sizes, like clothes, right? You get them in S, M, L, and XL. And they're actually all the same. They have a little kitchen, they have a little bathroom, they have a big industrial stair, and they have a hole, because the program was 1 or 2 persons per apartment. So you don't actually need a bedroom. You don't need a wall. It's enough to just have a ceiling to separate 2 spaces. You have a more private space upstairs and a more public space downstairs. And there's the cursive where people access the buildings. So there's also the lower space, also more social rooms. And I always have the feeling that there's, and maybe that's also due to me, there's a misinterpretation of Shinohara's work, or as a minimalist, right? At least I maybe at the beginning had the feeling, because at the same time also John Pawson became a big thing here in Switzerland. And white interiors, not a lot of detail, but actually through studying Shinohara's work and also through just working ourselves, I realized that minimalism is just a stylistic idea. It's actually very problematic and exclusive. And even John Pawson said he had a problem to put a Christmas tree in his own house. It just looked wrong. And as we've seen in Andrea's and Christian's images, the beauty about the Shinohara houses is that they can accept mess. They can, I know I'm over time, almost done. They can accept mess, they can accept daily life. It's a coexistence between completely normal way of life that is not even bound to furniture you put in. And that's also our goal, to make a building that is inclusive. So in this case, every single element is designed as so not to cost most. So every element keeps its own identity. It's an assembly of things where later stuff will be added by the people inhabiting. It has a spatial generosity like we see in the Prism House, and that can be accepted by inhabitants and also added to. It's an 8-story building, but it's only 4 architectural floors. Yeah, this is the social. They're like row houses, right? They're like row houses standing on terraces. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Taku Sakaushi. Good afternoon or good morning for the people in Swiss. And I'll be very happy to have a huge audience in Japan. I had 200, more than almost 300 people in Japan. Thank you very much for listening to us. Today, I would like to talk about the geometry and emotion, which I learned from Shinohara. Then, first, I will talk about how I learned those 2 ideas from him. Then I will introduce 4 books which I translate into Japanese from English, and then 2 books which I wrote by myself. And then finally, I will show you the 2 works by me. Then, well, I would like to say the conclusion in advance is to look at the geometry and emotion simultaneously, not just one side. It's very important to have both at the same time. So this is my work when I was in graduate school at Tokyo Tech, and then Shinohara taught me. And of course, the project, the challenging was a house in the neighborhood of Tokyo Tech, which is a very dense commercial area. So the site is very, very small, like 50 square meters or so. So I was influenced by his idea of geometry very much. So I put the circle and the vector, triangle, and to combine those to have the dense feeling of that superimposition. Then it was in 1984, Shinohara completed his house in Yokohama on the same year. And then he also treated with the openings geometrically very well. And then we have always the seminar in Shinohara laboratory to look at the model of this building. Just to look at it. No talking, just to look at it in like 10 minutes or so. Nobody talked. And Shinohara said, hey, Sakaushi, please talk anything. But I couldn't say anything. Then, more than 10 years after my graduation, Shinohara and several graduates of Tokyo Tech started to gather to have a kind of architectural meeting once a month. It starts from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to start drink wine and then until about 6 o'clock. So everybody's drinking. Besides, he's very, very strong. And then finally we published a book named The Tokyo Theory from Tokyo through Kazuo Shinohara, which contains the article describing big cities all over the world. Those are written by the Shinohara students, foreign Shinohara students from Barcelona, from New York, and so on. And then also ex-Japanese students who went to abroad to study. Like me, I went to Los Angeles. So I wrote the part of Los Angeles. And then Shinohara strictly told us to describe the cities, not logically, but emotionally. So this picture is taken in Shibuya, which is very pleasant space in Tokyo, and this picture is taken by himself. Then, 2015, I was the president of the judging committee of the doctoral thesis about the Kazuo Shinohara, written by Eric Massakosh. He might be in the Zoom meeting now. And then, since I was the president, so I precisely did this thesis. And then the title of that, 5 Forms of Emotion. Then I was really reconfirmed that the emotion is very much important for Shinohara's creative architecture. So let me change the subject a bit. I will introduce 2 translation books I did into Japanese. The first one is The Architecture of Humanism, Studying History of Taste by Japanese Scott, published in 1914. Because he praised the Renaissance architecture to deny the theories which support the neo-Gothic architecture, which was popular in England at that time. Then how he denied the theories support neo-Gothic architectures. He picked up the theories which support architecture, which is romantic way of supporting, mechanical way of supporting, ethical way of supporting, biological way of supporting neo-Gothic architecture. The reason why Japanese Scott denied was that those are the theories external to architecture. That's not internal to architecture. So he said that you need to think about mass, space, line, and consistency. Those are inherent in architecture. That's more important than the theories external to architecture. The another book I translated is The Walls and Buildings, which were written by Adrian Fordy, who is the professor of London University, who is still alive, teaches architectural history, published in 2000. That's very huge. Then he introduced the concepts which made modernism thinking, modernism theory. So he picked up about 20 concepts of modernism thinking. But actually, he included some concepts which support the postmodernism too. Then those are like design, flexibility, form, order, simplicity, space structure, blah, blah, blah. And the concept which support the postmodernism is character, context, history, memory, blah, blah, blah. But you can see that here again, there are the concepts which are inherent in architecture, like the theories supporting modernism, and the other group, as you can see, which the concept external interpretation. So I reconfirm that there are two types of concepts which support architecture. Then I wrote books, which is named The Rules of Architecture, ways of making and feeding architecture today. I tried to think about the theories inherent in architecture here. Then I said the architecture consists of things and space between things. That's very normal. And design is the operation of human form and relationship. Then, of course, obviously, I explained design of architecture by means of the concepts inherent in architecture. 9 years later, I wrote another book, which is named Architectural Episteme. I begin with the sentence, society makes architecture. Then, in this case, the society means art, subjectivity, visuality, ethics, consumption, globalization, class, and social. So, here, obviously, I explain the design of architecture by means of the concept external to architecture. The reason why I wrote two books is to look at the middle area of the concept, not just one. So important thing is the polarized concepts, like concepts external to internal architecture. Both are, of course, very important, not just one. So I want to look at the middle area. I wanted to increase the resolution of between two concepts. Of course, the theory in currently in architecture makes the autonomous architecture. Concepts external to architecture make a autonomous architecture. So let me be back to the two concepts, two ideas which I learned from Shinohara: geometry and emotion. Redwoods, geometry belongs to the autonomous architecture. Emotion belongs to autonomy. So I will introduce or show you the two works. One is a house, the other one is factory. And then, which I use the geometry, of course, very much, but try to put the motion. In order to put the motion, I will insert the movement into the building. Movement in this case means the movement of human beings. So I want to have the residents, in this case, to feel, to let the residents feel the movement of another people. So this is located in the mid-center of Tokyo. As you can see, the staircases just from the entrance. So I put the entrances, I put the staircases leading up to this floor and leading down to the basement. So as soon as you enter the entrance, you have the feeling that you have to move, leading up or leading down. So it has the kind of the feeling of the movement. So if you go down to the basement, if you have that kind of special space, I mean, this space is a space you don't have to take off your shoes. That's not very Japanese. And then the section shows that this building is really complicated, but it's connected like this. It's a kind of one space. Then if you go up to the second floor, you have the kitchen. dining and the living. So you can see the plants here. I want to show you the video. Hopefully, it will work. So the location of this house is like this, very slopey. So even outside, you have to move. You have to go up and down. So I would say that the house inside is connected to the environmental feeling. So the shape of the space is very complicated geometry. Okay. I will show you another example, which is a factory, but it's not just a factory, but recycling factory, which was built 50 years ago. At that time, the recycling factory is not very common in Japan, but now it's getting very popular. It's located near to the Haneda International Airport. Then the client told me to design it not as a factory, but the space where the used things are given, the bath. Usually, the recycling factory is supposed to be the garbage processing plant. So if the government thinks that the garbage processing plant should be closed box without any windows, so that any dust, noise, poisons, leakage cannot go out from the facility. But we try to convince them we don't generate any dust or noise or something. We took 1 year to convince them, but finally they understand. We gave them lots of evidence. Then here, I also want to put the movement. We want to show the movement of workers to the people who are outside of the building. That's why we put kind of piloty-like space here. It's kind of frame to show the activity inside. Then I want to show you another video. So the region is the name of the company, the Recycling Technology Management. So since the site is near to the Haneda Airport, there is no context of the environment. I designed not only the building, but also the uniform of the workers and that kind of machines. Since this is the leading company of the recycling factory, so the emperor comes here to look at the building. Actually, I asked the professional video artist to make it. I only told them the concept of the building, then they feel the concept and they make it. I think it could be the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Momoyo, Chris, and Andrea, and Fuminori Nousaku. And we they wrote us a very interesting topic. Everyone, my friend is almost exploded. And we are going to move directly to the discussion. So please go to your seat and at the end of the discussion, we are welcoming your question and the comment and the feedback. So in the earlier doing we just regarding the hands and or like listening online, please comment on the topic so that we can watch it and allow you to talk on the landing platform. So I pass to Tibo.
Thank you very much. How much time do we have? Maybe 3/4 of an hour. 40 minutes. So I will try to wrap it up the discussion, and I'll try to.
I think you should shall make it on. Is it on? No.
It's on.
Okay. Yeah, I think it works. Okay, I will try to summarize what won't be very easy because I made maybe 6 sides of notes. So it was extremely interesting. It was extremely challenging also to follow you and to think by myself what kind of questions shall I ask you afterwards, because you were telling almost everything I wanted to ask in the discussion. And so let's take it as a real, for me, it was a real success for this little symposium to hear your thoughts about space. And I think we shall talk about space mainly. You brought also the idea of emotion. So I think we will discuss also the topic of emotion. I will start with Momoyo. Unfortunately, she had to leave. But it was quite interesting for me to see how she was acquiring, or how she was becoming acquainted with Kazuo Shinohara thinking and with his architecture through publishing. So I don't want to speak of myself, but of course I got into the theory of Kazuo Shinohara through my publishing work. I got acquainted also during my studies at ETH, and I think this holds for almost everyone here, that everyone in a way got acquainted with the idea of architecture, a theory of Kazuo Shinohara in a very early stage of his or her, let's say, professional formation. For me, it was interesting to see how Momoyo achieved a kind of triangulation, of Japanese architectural landscape at the time. It was kind of becoming, getting some orientation as a young student. And I think as Kazuo Shinohara always had or was on a sitting or displaying a kind of strong position was architecture, he, for many of us, was gave this, like a lighthouse perhaps, showed us what architecture could be. Interestingly, every one of you tried to characterize Kazuo Shinohara and his architecture. This shows that on one side, his theory and his spaces remain a kind of enigmatic, but they are also very prolific. So it was great to hear and to see how Momoyo talked about the importance, for instance, of darstellende geometry. What is the word?
Descriptive geometry.
Descriptive geometry. Yes. So we have in his works, maybe in his later works, but already this can be seen in Umbrella House. We have these perturbations. So things perturbate each other, things perturbate space, and they really, in a geometrical way, start making space. So it's a pity we can't ask Momoyo because the work she did with Atelier Powwow is very, it's what I think. It must be very methodic. There really is a methodology. And it's interestingly that Kazuo Shinohara, in the beginning and also later on, but very much connected with traditional architecture, with the Umbrella House, he talked about the methodology, the methods of architectural traditional Japanese space. So this is something he was really interested in. Maybe we can talk later about that. Andrea and Christian, it was great to see how you appreciate or how you confront yourself with the architecture of Kazuo Shinohara. And I saw something like, you would say it's almost a Kantian notion, an unentangled interest. So you can speak about Kazuo Shinohara, about his space, how it is generated, how it is formed without any judgment. And I think this is something which is important also to have, to accept maybe space as an entity which is different from us, which is not related to, let's say, social phenomena, to politics, etc. So something which has autonomy, and you were really expressing this interest in space as it is. There was a beautiful notion where I think it was Christian told, where he told that space is the core of the house of the Shinohara. So space really is something which makes the house, which generates the whole idea, the whole concept, etc. Maybe you suggested also kind of method, just reading and understanding the house, which became very obvious in the kind or in the way you were dealing with umbrella house, for instance. So it really was, you dissected not the theory of Shinohara, but you dissected the house of Shinohara, and this way you understood how the machine, the space machine works. Fuminori portrayed Shinohara as a kind of, let's say, anthropologist, as a kind of etymologist, which completely differs from perception here in Switzerland, because in Switzerland, many of us, see Shinohara as a kind of magician, as somebody who created spaces from I don't know where, from abstract concepts, from abstract ideas. And you showed how the architect really relied to the notion of Minka, how he related to the idea of the city, and how he and how you. This is very interesting. How you try to learn from traditional architecture and to bring it back into our times. And of course, I sense something like that. I think that ecology is a very important issue, or a very important topic to relate Kazuo Shinohara with the past. It's extremely interesting how you connect. So this is a judgment, please. How you connect to the first style of Shinohara, where he, in a way, deals with concepts derived from tradition, and how he tries to estrange these concepts, how he makes joji windows in a big proportion, in a size which is absolutely uncommon for traditional architecture. And I think it's an interesting way how you dealt with that. Okay, Oli, so many sentences I just copied, and I'm sure you will read that once when I speak about your architecture, or when I write about your architecture. So what I like maybe most is that you perceive Shinohara's architecture as never absolute, and which is very interesting, because he was making very clear notions, very in a way exclusive notions about architecture. He said architecture is art, architecture is blah 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 blah. There is the principle of frontality, very clear cut language, notions on architecture, and the way how his spaces are perceived by architects, as you were telling us, is completely different. And in a way reflects also the perception of Kazuo Shinohara here in Switzerland, I think. How, because there are the ones who are reading his architecture texts, the ones available in English or in German. There are a few texts in German, and there are others ones who try to understand or are familiar with the way how he deals in a very soft, let's say, soft way, open way with space. It was funny because this also relates to methodology, how you translate Shinohara into your own, let's say, tjens Padmanabhan language. So you're interested, of course, in the figure, or how he figures spaces. That's what Shinohara, which is very typical, and it works. Maybe related to one house you were speaking of. So this is the one, I think it was one of your first works I wrote about it. It's quite interesting how you characterized your project as, in a way, as a self-centered architecture, something which belongs to itself, which has its own logic, which has its own character, but it is able to link to the context of the city. So this again is something which I see also in Shinohara. Maybe the mechanism is a different one, but let's say the result is resembled. Okay. I'm very happy to talk about the opposition of geometry and emotion. So this is very Kazuo Shinohara, and it's great to that you have also cited the work of Enrique Bosch, which I consider as very important. He writes very clearly about the, let's say, about the form finding principles, maybe about the ideas behind the architectural emotion there plays a very important role. I was happy about the sentence you were trying to characterize the meeting you had with drinking and with your other Shinohara students to, I hope I understood you correctly, stroll through the streets, not and not analyzing the city, but to perceive it emotionally. And I think this is something which here in maybe in the West or in Switzerland has been lost in a way, because we talk about style, we talk about images, we talk about and these are all kind of mental constructs, and we don't really speak about our emotions. And I think this is quite an important link to reconnect to Shinohara or maybe Japanese architecture. It was interesting that maybe in the lectures or in the talks you all gave to us, I felt that Shinohara invites us to conceptualize something, to because so this is really very much related. 2 minutes. 2 minutes related to language. You have to conceptualize something to acquire a filter. So if you study Shinoharistics, let's say, if you study his texts, if you study his, let's say, plans, if you study his houses, if you have the possibility to enter and to visit the house of Shinohara, you may get the instruments or the filter for to acquire further architectural knowledge. So this is something that happens to me as well. Writing Shinoharistics, I, in a way, got conscious of phenomena Shinohara produced, whether he wanted to or not, I don't know, but I encountered them as phenomena. And these phenomena, to understand them, helped me to conceptualize them. And now, of course, I have a filter to see architecture, to step against what is coming to me. So really, it gave me the instruments to understand architectural space. Okay, we shall speak about space. Maybe we'll start with Fuminori. So I was suggesting it, but maybe you could make it more precise. How, for instance, and this is of course the question, of course, is related to the topic. So the echo of space is lost. We have to re-establish the echo of space, I would say. And in your architecture, we see that it is possible. How can you re-establish the echo of space? Let's say through ecology. How does ecology create space?
It is a very difficult question. But I tried to connect ecology to the space, but Japanese contemporary society, it's difficult to make pure space because, as you showed today, the Japanese regulation become very tight. So architects are already surrounded by this condition. So we have to reconnect the new network. So ecological thing is it's how to say turning point to reconnect to the network of things. So change mind. So because we normally Japanese young architects focus on the how to say the arrangement of industrial elements. For example, the concrete and metal mesh, and it's very dry and how to say it's in organic. It's very cool, but the change the mind to the ecological things. So we use organic things. So it can architecture can be changed to the new kind of space through the ecological thing.
And when you speak about networks, reconnecting to the networks of things, you mean a broad network. So it's an ecological network. It's not only a network and let's say cyber network or a network of people or something. It's understood in a very broad sense. It's great that you have shown this earth plastered with earth, the wall plastered with earth, because it really reminded me one of Shinohara's house, the one with the earth floor, where you have also the same warmth, the same let's say spirit of the material, also from the first time. Maybe Taku or Oli, the Japanese word kukan is quite a new word, and maybe Kazuo Shinohara was one of the first to give it an architectural sense. I'm not really sure, but it is something. So I think space can be characterized as something which gives us a strange experience, or which gives us an experience at all. maybe experiences are more perceivable if they are strange. I don't know. So maybe how does geometry create space? What happens while you're designing with geometry? I mean, both words, they have similarities in the way how geometry is, let's say, pushed to create perception. What is happening?
When I came here, I was reading his doctorate thesis. It was huge volume. It was not published. I got it from the National Library, and then there was incredible research about the Japanese traditional architecture. And then he said that the Japanese architecture has the character of division, and the Western architecture is the character of connection. And then I was, of course, he wrote about the frontality and the elevation and so on. Anyway, I reconfirmed that he used the traditional geometry very much to his architecture. Then it was like rectangular shape. That's very basic for him. I mean, the square is almost his, how can I say, his essential spirit, I would say. But for me, as I showed you in my graduation work, I always try to make the static shape or pure geometry, like pure circle or pure square. I didn't want to make it because I want to change a bit of the geometry. Then I will I think that I could make it more exciting than the static shape. Then, well, you asked me how the geometry could make a space. I would say that only just the pure geometry cannot make a space. I'm sorry, Fushima. In my opinion, I want to make it more exciting. Then the space happen.
Okay. Oli? This one? Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, there. Hello? Yeah. That? No. Yeah. It's been only, I think, 2 years since Thomas and I started to talk about space. It was at a lecture in Oslo, where Nevin Fuchs, who's an older architect and professor in Oslo, he visited our lecture, and he's a huge Shinohara fan, by the way. He visited our lecture and says, "It's all nice. You talk very well about your ideas, but you guys never speak about space." And that was the craziest question ever asked in a lecture we could not answer. And we realized we never speak about space. We don't even speak about selves amongst each other. And since then, but I'm thinking, what is space, you know? And I know there's architects who try to design space as an idea, as a spatial idea, but we tend to think about order, we work with plans, we work with sections, we look at graphic representations of space, and we try to modulate these. There's breakthrough moments where we see, now there's air in the plane. Mm-hmm. But we don't think about if there's air in space, because space is defined by so many elements. So therefore, this makes it extremely complicated.
No, because it's quite funny. It's a typical phenomenon of architects. They it's always since 2 years. You talked about you were speaking of space. Many others always speak about space, and if you ask them, so how do you create space? They tell you, because we have order, we have atmosphere, we have I don't know, many other things. We have social ritual, blah 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 blah, and it is almost underestimable. And I'm convinced that you in your brain, while designing, every one of us, in a way, responds to what he sees on the plan or on the screen, and this creates feelings, emotion. And this comes from geometry and from, I don't know, because from the architectural elements.
But you can never see everything, not even in a model, right? And so for me, space is always a result of things. It's like when you meet people, right? The outcome of the evening, of the day, of the symposium, it's open in the end. And I think space, it's a bit the same. You recognize it, but each time you visit, it can be different due to different furniture, different lighting conditions, different weather outside, your own feeling, the person you're in it with, right? But of course, there is spaces that are more generous and have a capacity to include more things, also over time. And there's spaces who always feel kind of limited and maybe singular or absolute.
Maybe I could come back to Taku, because you showed your project, and I think space is very important. And there is one moment in the movie, the short movie, where you come down the stair, where you walk the space, you kind of rev up the space machine by your movement. And you enter this library, I think, where you have this perturbation of this very strange, heavy, lasting ceiling, wall, I don't know what. So, what was the idea, or what was the intent when you designed that?
Hello. As Oliver just mentioned, that the space is always changeable, and then why it's changeable? It's because there is like people with furniture or I don't know lighting or the weather. So, but most important or most significant element which change the space is the movement. I think that's why I always try to put the movement in architecture, and then the space always changes. But somebody told me that that's not the space, that's a place, they said. Places always change. But the space is more universal, he said. He told me. Well, it could be, I think. So I'm a bit confused these days. But anyway, I try to put the movement. That's for sure.
Okay. You were talking also about emotion, and this is something I would like to ask you too, Christian and Andrea. As you were visiting many houses, I said that there is a kind of uninvolved interest, but of course, one could sense also that there is emotion. You perceive space as something, let's say, intriguing, interesting, maybe also as something estranging, something which you can recognize as different from you. So, what kind of emotions did you experience while visiting Shinohara houses? I can imagine there are many different emotions, but maybe there is kind of grounding, a kind of emotional background, which always is the same. Please tell me about that. Again, difficult question.
So I think for us it was always, Shinohara's houses are different than houses we know. They have these structures and they create emotion because you have to walk around them. They are really present, so you cannot just deny them. They are there, and that's a spatial emotion created. We always thought it was really interesting, or we were attracted by it somehow. And it's always this. You feel also comfortable because there is something else in the room. You're not alone in a huge space. You're not lost there because you have something to hold on also. So it also creates comfort.
Great. I think something what I've learned about Shinohara spaces is that space is not linked to a size. I mean, umbrella house is very difficult to capture in photos, but emotions and what you feel is something you have to experience if you're inside. And also the structure in many buildings, they direct people in which direction you can move within the space. And this is very fascinating because the architect controls movement of the people who move inside the space.
And this is something that I experienced also in housing where it's like the house with what beams they would, take you by the hand and lead you through the space. So you're never alone, as Lena said. I think this is a very precious angle. Okay, I don't know how much time we have. Maybe we open the discussion now.
We have 10 minutes left, so we would like to hear from you. So, you have a question or a comment or critique?
Can you also ask the people in Japan?
Sure.
Raise your hand.
I think it's on.
Or take this one.
Maybe Taishi, you're lucky you can break the silence.
Hello, Tashi. nice to have you here.
Are you here?
Yes. Hi, Tibo, and hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It's very exciting and it's very interesting. Okay, the title of this symposium, Learning Space from Shinohara, is quite, I thought it's quite interesting because maybe the word from is quite important. So learning space of Shinohara is already, okay, it's enough maybe, but learning space from Shinohara is quite important, I guess. And, so maybe what I want to hear is almost same with Tibo. So I think the definition of space or the stance towards space is different for each presenter. So I want to ask about that. So for example, the Shinohara space is quite poetic space and maybe we can say emotional space. It's very strong and maybe it's elemental. And Sakamoto's, Momoyo's professor, Sakamoto's space is more relational space. So that kind of difference between Shinohara's space and your own space, I want to hear about that. So now this symposium is open in the Swiss. So I want to hear if you can. Could you tell me the difference between Japanese space and Swiss German word Raum and Platz?
That's interesting.
Oh, maybe you or you.
Yeah,
So I had when I was a student, is it on? Now it's on. Yeah. When I was student in Lausanne, there was a French professor, I think it was Jacques Lecoq, and he said, Raum, ça remplit la bouche, it fills your mouth. And I mean, that was such a great description of what space probably means in a Swiss context. Yet, this is exactly, like for Thomas and my work, I would say it's exactly not what we do. I don't have an idea of space as an entity, of space as a volume, of something that I have in my mouth. So I guess I've never been to Japan, so I've never seen Japanese space. And I went on Friday to Vitra to see the umbrella house, only to find out that you can't see it because it's so fragile. And so I called desperately Christian, like hoping he would be there. So I've never seen Japanese space, but I have the feeling that my sense of space is more like Japanese space. But maybe you guys have to explain what Japanese space is. Really.
Very difficult.
I think need a bit more time to talk about space in Japanese culture, and we're not very well knowledgeable what it means because our Japanese is very limited. But we know that the expression of space was first introduced in the 1920s and not before. And actually, space, this term didn't exist in Japanese architecture before. Something that
that we use to describe space, but there are many other ways of describing space in Japanese architecture.
Maybe also it's when we use the term space, it's more static and it's not linked to an emotion or something like that. It can be really abstract. We're talking really abstract about space. Like generating space, and it's like this and that, and it's just the space. But it's not the social aspect or the emotion behind it. So it's never thought in a four-dimensional way. It's like just like a planned space. And that's maybe a difference. I think in Japan, space is more than just the volume itself, or it can be filled with something.
It's very funny that we're talking about space in the negative way, and I would like to emphasize. So maybe this is a little bit polemic, but if space didn't exist in Japan before 1920, it didn't exist here in Switzerland before now.
Really?
No, because we always speak about it, and it's interesting how Kukan is a word that was created for space in the 19th century to describe mathematical, geometrical, topographical phenomena. And that Shinohara derived from maybe that discussion, a special interest as a mathematician, as a trained mathematician. And then he really became able to deal with that very strange entity. And I think emotion, if we start talking about emotion here in Switzerland, I think we're quite in a good path towards space making.
Maybe we have 3 minutes, but we want to another.
Please. Anybody? Archie.
I just want maybe to react to what you said, the difference between Swiss space player and Japanese space. From what I experienced, I have the feeling like Japanese is more like abstract. You feel the motion, you feel the space, I would say. And in Switzerland, we tend to express it with colors, materials, and stuff like this. And maybe there is a difference there. We tend to create it with surfaces, with flat surfaces, say, as they tend to do it with the shape, with the volume. And that's what feeling I had when I watched the presentations, and also your presentation, that all those houses from Shinohara, they have how to say it? They have a special shape that induce movements. You want to move around it. And we tend to, as a visitor, a building in Switzerland, I tend to stay still and just watch around me and then experience it. But it's not induced movement, so I don't know, maybe there is something here to get some difference. That's just my point of view.
I have a feeling that
Shape. Oh.
Maybe I can add a bit to what you said. Maybe there's also a kind of fear of contradiction, or that when we do architecture in Switzerland, everything is clean, very logic, organized. So we are kind of talking in sections and plans, and space is kind of a result. We look at it at the end, but it's not starting to think how a space is put together. So maybe there are even two different ways to conceive space, to think about it first and then find, let's say, a construction, or to construct something and the space comes out of the result. I'm not sure in Shinohara's work, maybe it's both at the same time. Is my interpretation. There
there is this contradiction. Sometimes you feel it's in a way forced, and sometimes it just happens by juxtapositions, which makes things also very intriguing and interesting.
I mean, it's basically like love. It's something like it's like love. It's like love. It's annoying. You can't grasp it. Huh? You only can describe it. You can describe what happens when you are in love. But we're all convinced that we need to get in love sometimes, all over our lifetime. So it's important. And we didn't talk about the importance of space. And I think this was the basic question why we are here. So maybe one last statement.
Maybe you have a.
Yeah.
Well, my question would have been to more concept that touched on emotion, uncertainty, fragmentation. I'm not an architect. I just finished my PhD in cultural studies, was in Japan and worked in health. So, but I think to me, because I talk about space in my thesis, a very interesting contrast perhaps between Japanese culture and European culture was if you go to visit Ise Jingu and the space is defined by a rope. And so I think that tells you a lot about how space can be differently perceived depending on European or Japanese cultures. So, no question. Too many questions, not enough.
Okay, who wants to finish by saying or talking about or thinking about the importance of space?
Maybe everyone.
Everyone a short statement. Great. Takes 1 hour.
Well, I think there's architecture that is exclusive and architecture that is inclusive. And I think it's very open how you achieve one or the other. I'm certainly for an inclusive architecture, inclusive idea of space that allows humans to use it in the way that they want, that liberates them rather than puts them under pressure.
Well, I think the space is very, very important, as well as other things.
I totally agree with that.
I hope that all architects use space as a starting point, not just as a result.
But if the result is good, you wouldn't allow that to happen.
It's fine.
It will never become a real Shinoharistics. I think finding methodology is very direct related to space, especially Shinohara, I think.
I thought it's so long, but it was too short to discuss, and it was but even in short time, it was fulfilled discussion. Thank you so much for the panelists and also participants. And maybe we do second round. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming and participating.